and still being able to carry out a discussion that is really deep, that requires a lot of intelligence. So I think, that's one of the core that he actually is having, the success he's having, although he's been doing it for 10 years. So of course he's
some routine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his stand-up comedy background as well.
Yes,
you have to be fast on your mental feet if you're going to survive on a stage like that, I think.
But how do we feel? What's the thinking here about what news outlets we really go to more and more, like Joe Rogan versus more traditional news and all that? I mean, like the whole conversation starts now a little bit, from the angle that some of the old ways of media broadcasting and news is it starting to get obsolete? And and they are sort of building. We go somewhere else for information.
Well, I think if you go back to the internet as a phenomenon, obviously it has sort of democratized communication a lot in 1,000 different ways, right? Media would be one of those established sort of businesses that has to cope with that new type of competition. I mean, you see it in music, you see it in everything.
Sure.
Everything.
Spotify democratized, music in some way and reduced a bit the role of music labels or record labels, right?
Yeah, or rearranged it anyway. And you can see it with online healthcare services sort of booming in Sweden right now, and it clashes with the old established legacy way of doing things, and you get a lot of conflicts there, which in a way is healthy, I think, because establishment should always be a challenge,
and it's also back to one of our core concepts, which is first principle thinking, right?
Yes.
Elon Musk, which is, I think, one of your role models as well. So I think Elon will come up a number of times tonight, but I think the same.
Did you read my notes?
I know it from before. But I think news reporting would benefit from some kind of disruption as well.
It does, and everyone does.
But isn't it happening right now among us? Isn't it actually happening slowly but surely that it is actually starting to become a new news and media landscape in some ways? Who do we really listen to? Stuff like this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's I'm no expert in this in this topic, but from my personal experience, I was really a news junkie up until 6-7 years ago, something like that, and it's sort of slowly faded away.
And you followed what, traditional?
Yeah, everything.
Media?
Everything. I subscribe to various newspapers. I watch broadcast news all the time. What's the latest news? I went into their websites all the time to look. Okay, what's happening? And I started following them on social media and so forth. And then I guess gradually shifted to open social media platforms to consume my media the content from established media through social media. And the next step for me, I think, is to get, I guess, more and more narrow in a way. So that
narrow in what way?
When it comes
to
more sources, but narrower sources, if that makes any sense. So I mean,
it's personalized because
yes, very, very, very much tailored to my individual taste and interest, I guess.
And what is the problem with the old news media, in your opinion? Is it too shallow, or is it what is it that is driving you to change behavior?
It's basically one too many, and as a concept, broadcasting, and you have to. It's a lot of trade-off to cater to everyone's interest. Then perhaps you cater to very few people's interest. I don't know.
So it's one way is you want to personalize or go deeper on the topics that you're interested in.
Yeah, and I can only speak for myself, but I mean, podcasts and narrower sort of media, or this discussion for us on open social media platforms and stuff like that, much more interesting, I think, and it's much more deeper. And I mean, it's coming back to media. Often there is a narrative that's being sort of pushed in a way, or described, or
there's an angle. Someone has an angle.
Yes, there are angles. So there's a story that someone wants to tell, but it's not necessarily the pursuit of truth.
No.
And Speaking of Joe Rogan, as I understand him, I think I've seen a couple of hundred of his episodes, so I'm sort of versed in his way of interviewing. And he's open, he's honest, and he wants to know the truth, basically. I don't know if he gets there. I mean, if you can get there anyway, but he's pushing that. And that's very much more aligned with like the pursuit of science.
So there's no other like hidden agenda in some way? You mean,
I don't feel that. Not perhaps like indirectly. I mean, everyone is subjective in their outlook
he's
on reality.
subjective in what guests he invites, right? But when the actual guest is there, he feels very authentic to try to empathically understand the guest.
Yes, he hasn't. I can't see that he has an agenda besides that he's curious about this person and that person's experiences and look on life, and he wants to pursue that. And I think that's a great thing.
It would be awesome if you actually get Trump on the show. And I'm not really sure if you've seen it recently, but apparently there is a discussion, or people are trying to push Trump to come. On the
Joe
show.
Rogan,
and they also had like a push trying to have a debate between Biden and Trump, before the election.
Prior to the election, yeah. That would have been something.
It would have been awesome, I think.
Yeah, but there's another angle in here. What maybe also why we are sort of fed up with news and all that, and I think it goes back to what you said with Joe Rogan, and it's a little bit this topic of authenticity, hard word. Yeah. And we spoke in another episode, Elon Musk, why he doesn't really advertise, but we really listen to him and we get engaged when he talks. And he's not the most fluent, perfect, speaker, but it goes through the heart because he speaks in what I consider with an authentic engineering's giddy approach. You know? And I think it feels real. And this whole realness, I think, is some of the stuff that I think sometimes in normal media is like, I know what color it is on this news broadcast show, so I know how the angle is going to be on the story before we even hear the story. I know the narrative even before it's played out.
Yeah, and that's
not really truth, right?
Or at least if there is a narrative and you know that narrative, do you want to hear that story again?
No.
Do you want to listen to something else?
I actually, you kind of want to go behind the scenes of what really happened and what are the different angles. And typically the narrative is not really balanced. So the narrative puts it in one corner or the other corner. But the world is more complex than that.
Yes, awesome. I would agree.
I think we should have this as a topic later, speaking about the media and the filter bubble and personalization and pros and cons of social media and all these kind of things. So I added it to the list. So
great.
But before that, perhaps we should, for one, welcome you here, Pär Nygårds. It's a pleasure to have you here. We've met a number of times in the past. And that's always fun discussions, speaking about EU or the parliament discussions and whatnot, and politics about AI and data and so forth. So it's been a pleasure to speak to you and know you. But for people that don't know you, how would you describe yourself?
Well, first let me just say thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here, actually. Feels like a real privilege. Yes, who am I? To quote a colleague of mine, I've been asking myself that my whole life. I don't have an answer. but seriously, you could perhaps describe me as a tech policy wonk with perhaps some philosophical leanings. Or perhaps
wonk.
It's... nerd.
Nerd, yeah.
Tech policy nerd with this leading to philosophy.
Yeah,
I like that.
That would be me as a person, and or perhaps it's the other way around. Because I've studied in the humanities for a long time. So I basically started my academic career with studying law at the law school in Stockholm, and I dropped out because it wasn't for me, I thought, and studied a lot of behavioral sciences after that, and ended up with a major in computer science. So it's kind of a broad spectrum of...
From law to
code, basically.
To code.
From code to code, perhaps.
That's
and now I work doing public affairs in an industry association here in Stockholm, in Sweden. So it sort of follows my academic career in a way. And I thought I was moving away from law, but
You came back to policy, but in another way.
But policy is often law and rules, so...
Sure. But you also been part of .se, right? And
yes, I was for one term on their board of directors.
And what do they do?
Well, basically, it's they're handling the top domain in Sweden. .se. That's the sort of prime responsibility of that organization. They also have its what's it called in English? Stiftelse.
Oh, foundation.
Foundation, I would guess.
Yeah. In their charters, anyway, they are obliged to expand and promote the use of internet in Sweden. Mm-hmm. So they do a lot of sort of outreach and information campaigns and stuff like that. They have a yearly report on the internet's expansion in Sweden, how people use the internet in various age segments and demographic segments and so on, various types of media consumption and so forth.
What do you think about this? I remember, in the early days when .se actually became available, and in the beginning you were not allowed to register a domain there unless you actually had some kind of trademark or something registered, and it was really tough, and then it changed a bit, but this was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was prior to my time there.
But what do you think about domain name handling in general? I guess we all need it because who could remember IP addresses, and you need to have a proper way to just find resources on the internet. But it's also a bit of almost a market these days, wouldn't you say, with having a proper domain name? And the market could be questionable if that's a good way to handle it. Or do you have any thoughts about how to have a well-functioning domain name system?
I've learned, perhaps too late in life, that if you should criticize something, you should have a very good alternative for it.
True.
And I'm not sure I have an alternative to domain names, actually, on the top of my head anyway.
Yeah.
But it's have you noticed any major systemic issues when it comes to domain names and how
if you take a .com domain, it's such a big market there. If you register your name in advance and someone else later comes to and wants to have it, they can pay a lot of money to just get the domain name itself. And then the question is that really a well-functioning market? I'm not sure.
I haven't investigated it actually, so I'm a bit hesitant to say too much about it. But again, what would be the alternative? How to make it functional? Yeah. Perhaps we will get into functional markets later on here when we talk about regulation.
Yeah, you have some background in finance as well, so could be interesting to discuss.
So, but from university, or so to speak, what was your the quick steps to where you are now? So, what's the sort of main pivotal things that sort of shaped your understanding of how you ended up where you are?
Well, basically, I've been at my current organization for quite some years, 13 years, something like that. So I've been there a long, long time. But previous to that, I worked in a think tank on globalization issues, actually, when it was unhip. So a think tank was started to sort of promote, speaking of narratives, a more positive outlook upon globalization. And I worked there managing their website and also did some work related to the contents of the actual think tank. And that's sort of how I got into contact with politics and policy, for that matter. So I worked there about a year or something like that. And then I got this opening at this industry association that I actually work at right now.
And perhaps that's a good introduction to, how did that happen? Can you just speak about, how did you find the opening and what made you attracted to it?
Well, basically, coming back to this think tank, which is called Global Utmaning, Global Challenge, globalutmaning.se, I think they still exist, actually. That really made me interested in policy issues. And I also saw, because we had this working groups and they were discussing various kinds of policy and how it should be shaped and so forth. And that made me realize that you can really influence things, and not always from like the politics side of things, but that you can influence being a stakeholder.
Right.
So there was an opening at my current organization then, and I basically sought it out and get hired.
Can you speak about what the opening was about? What did you start doing there when you?
Oh my God! It's not concerning data anyway. It was concerning public affairs, but more oriented towards public procurement, legal matters as well. So I am a law school dropout, so I have some grasp of law and regulation, and also with my background as a computer scientist, I guess they found me interesting. So I did work with public procurement issues and also IP and other
intellectual property.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
Not IP addresses.
No, not that. That was later. No, so intellectual property and basically copyright. And I did a fairly long stint of focusing on copyright, basically sort of trying to, within the realms of this organization and representing the IT and telecom industry in Sweden, try to fence off various kinds of responsibilities that other stakeholders in industries want to put upon, not the least various kinds of intermediaries like internet service providers. I mean, you probably remember Napster and the Pirate Bay and everything. It was like
never heard of a Pirate Bay and never used it as well.
Of course not. Of course not. No, it's only rumors to me, but exactly. It was a big thing.
A friend of mine used
it.
A
friend of mine used to. I've heard about it.
Exactly.
But so when we talk about copyright, it was in relation to those kind of
yes, online infringements in music and film and computer.
So let's see, when was this?
2005
or something like that, right?
Yes,
it was huge.
If I remember my friend correctly, it was around those years.
Does Napster exist?
I don't think so. No.
It's like it's like it was. It's not that long ago, but it feels a very, very long time ago. And before
people younger than us do not know what that is.
Because like Pirate Bay and Napster, like that, why do you need Spotify?
Yeah. But for people that don't know IT and Telecom, how would you describe that organization?
We're classic Coke, I should say. Perhaps not Coke Zero, but we're a rather traditional industry organization and an employers association. So we have like 1,400 member companies, and we help them with various services, which is mainly tied to their role as employers. So we have like collective agreements that some members use and some does not, but many of them use our HR services, so we assist when it comes to HR matters, which is not always the easiest thing to grasp and handle. But that's the part that I don't focus too much on in my daily job, but rather the industry part, being a representative for the tech sector in Sweden, basically. Mm-hmm.
So in what way, they have a large number of, I guess the biggest tech companies in Sweden, at least as members of this organization.
Yes.
And what would you say the value proposition, so to speak? Why are companies wanting to join that organization?
Basically to help sort of steer both the industry and its sort of constraints when it comes to regulation and other market conditions in a favorable way. For the industry as such. Then again, we have also more sort of immediate services for your needs. Various kinds. We have like standard agreements for like business contracts, standard contracts, which is very popular. You get a very huge discount as a member company, and that's a great pull factor as well.
Awesome. And can you perhaps name some companies that are part of it, just so people get a feeling for what type of companies that are part?
Sure. Well, you have the legacy players from the telecom sector and the IT sector, like Telia, Ericsson, Microsoft, IBM, CGI, former VM Data. And so forth, like big legacy stakeholders, and then you have a wide variety of other types of companies that are perhaps smaller, perhaps younger. We try to expand towards more sort of like tech, the tech community to be relevant for them and to make a valuable proposition.
But you're spanning really the hardware technology vendors, the software technology vendors, and also consultants of different tech-related consulting.
So more or less anything in the tech sector, and it's basic. I would sort of flip that question and say that if you're interested, if you're a company that's based in Sweden and interested in what we do, not the least when it comes to policy making, because we have quite a large operation when it comes to public affairs. I have I think 5 colleagues, something like that, doing public affairs in various capacities, which is rather large for such a small organization. We're about 10 people. If you're interested in that, you're welcome to us. So it doesn't matter if you're like an online health provider, if you're in logistics, or if you are like an old school software developer. If you're interested in our questions, you're welcome to join us.
And basically you push, lobbying is maybe not the right word, but you're pushing fundamental topics where regulation is not relevant anymore in some areas.
But to me, lobbying is not a dirty word, so it's absolutely lobbying. We're trying to sort of distill the industry's position in various, for the industry relevant topics like skills, data policy that I work with, telecom regulation, sustainability,
and then from an industry point of view, trying to persuade who? The politicians,
typically
the lawmakers, the legislative.
Yes, legislators, and obviously the government, so politicians, and I'd say also regulatory agencies is very important for us to have a good relation with, so they understand. Like the Data Protection Agency, IMI, Datainspektionen, previously called.
Immigrations? No, we're joking.
No, that's the other one.
There's some of those Freudian slips we done. I was joking actually. So Integritetsmyndigheten.
Yeah, Integritetsskyddsmyndigheten.
Skyddsmyndigheten,
yeah,
sorry.
So
Datainspektionen before.
Yeah, exactly. And that to us, it's super important as an industry that they understand the industry, its inner workings, how their outlook upon us as an industry when it comes to regulation
for sure
is in line with how the industry actually functions, and that's not bad mouthing them in any way, but that can be a challenge sometimes to get the message across. So that's why we need like a broad representation of companies within our organization, so we can build a sort of a both solid and representative position on various issues, I guess.
Yeah, and where are you? Your main role and key focus right now in this organization? It is
my personal.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm responsible for data policy within my organization. So anything that touches data, or most things anyway, which is quite a lot. It's grown. I manage something that is called the Data Council, which is a member council comprised of member companies, obviously, in our organization, some 40 companies there, and it ranges from like the big ones, like Google, Facebook, Telia, Ericsson, companies like that, to very small local Swedish
and could you give me examples of the concrete topics that is high on the agenda? Right?
Like data protection would be a major topic. Some EU regulation as well. We haven't typically been too active when it comes to EU regulation, not at least on the EU level, because you have to. Someone said you should know your limitations. Famous quote. I don't remember from whom, but we are rather small for being in Brussels and trying to influence. So we mainly focused on Sweden, but like the Digital Services Act, which is an upcoming regulation on liability for digital services within the EU. That's something that we're focusing on right now.
GDPR has been
GDPR always since its conception.
Since its conception.
Yeah, we can get back to that as well. Yeah. That's a rather large topic in itself. And on the national level, one of the major issues for us, and it's sort of a local example of what's also going on the EU level, is the conditions for the use of cloud services and other
Cloud Act.
The Cloud Act, yes. That's one aspect of it, but the use of cloud services in public sector, or rather public cloud services in public sector, so basically outsourcing of IT operations from the public sector, that is basically today in Sweden a non-functional market.
And I think this is a topic in its own where there has been several different cases and lawyers looking at this from different topics and basically overruling each other, and it's been policy making or interpretation of the law. The way you interpret it is like, have you thought? It's not thought through. So I think this topic is very interesting on the cloud interpretation, because in one way everything is illegal, right? If you take it to one extreme. And so could we go into, park it, but go into this topic?
I read it as a topic. So
because
let's go
this is
into
huge.
cloud services and how public sector and what's the alternative, perhaps in Sweden or Europe.
But also if we can go deeper on the actual interpretation of the law, because there's actually competing interpretations now. The way I understand it.
Yeah, sure. We'll get back to it, but it's very complex, and it's there is not one truth here, basically.
But I think it could be very helpful for the listeners to understand the landscape and to understand what it's the different core positions here.
Yeah, sure. Let's unpack it.
Yeah. Let's unpack it later.
Cool. And
that's a good one.
And for people that don't understand terms like public affairs or what policy making or data policy means, how would you describe it in more concrete terms?
Well, basically, I'd say that we as an organization, and in my role as a public affairs expert, is basically to represent a special interest, so not the general public or anything like that, but the special interest, which would be our member companies, and the tech sector in a broader sense as well, which is, it's what's good for our members is good for the tech sector and vice versa in Sweden. So if you see that as a
frame,
sort of frame, or a sort of special interest, we try to championing that special interest's need. And some people might refrain from that description that special interest bad. You shouldn't. You should always work for the common good, right? But then again, if you're championing a special interests that can also be for the general public's good, which is my actual personal conviction in our case.
I can see that. That's a good point.
Through working for us in our industry, we're creating better conditions to help society. Basically.
But the way I interpret special interest, I think it's a positive way. I think, and relating it to data and AI and data literacy, is a little bit like special interest also means that we have a sector who has a deeper understanding and a deeper foundational consequence analysis that they sit on. And when you do general interest, typically general could also be shallow interest.
Yes.
So here we have a tech sector who probably understands this particular piece of the problem deeper than anyone else.
Yes.
And you need to then get that heard. So I think special interest to me is deeper understanding. Do you see what I mean?
That's a great perspective, and I'd be very happy to follow up this sort of thread, because as I see it, we as an industry, obviously we know ourselves the best. The technology, its possible implications, good and bad, how you could sort of, perhaps not on a data level, but how you can regulate it or sort of create conditions for it to sort of harvest the upside of it, but while you're curbing risks of bad things happening. To put it simply.
But to put to date on AI and what we have seen in congressional hearings in the US, it's quite clear that the general lawmaker has no fucking clue.
Exactly. So, and who's the responsibility to educate them?
Exactly.
So there you have as a stakeholder, you have an obligation to actually help them understand,
to make conscious decisions.
Exactly. But then again, it would be nice if all regulation was made in good faith and with no special concern for your own needs, and it's always for the general public's best and so forth. But obviously that's not the case.
You need to be super knowledgeable in this particular case.
Yes, and also if you look at sort of the structure or model or like process, like the system for creating laws and regulation, it's basically not. it's not screwed together to handle these rapid changing conditions. That's a major obstacle in creating like sustainable regulation for the tech sector, whether it be like AI or data protection or whatever, because the take up is growing so fast, and it affects so many things that the lawmaker really can't keep up, because lawmaking is a very slow process, and it in a way needs to be slow, or it needed to be slow anyway. So if you want to sort of regulate things and remove like risks, but while you still keep a possibility to innovate and deploy new things, try new things like trial and error, use the free market, you can't regulate too much. You need regulation.
That's an interesting topic. I think regulation is a topic we should really go into, and pros and cons with that, and what happens if you over or under regulate and everything. But just to go back a bit to like public affairs and special interest groups and how you represent all the companies that you do have. I guess one way to reason about this is to say, what would happen if you didn't exist? Who would take the initiative to try to influence policymakers? Who would try to take the initiative to see, even though the intention of GDPR was good, perhaps the execution or implementation of it wasn't the best, and who would really take that responsibility,
Who
right?
would take that on?
Other special interests that would perhaps be narrower. Not saying that narrow is wrong. If you look at like GDPR and how it came to be, it was not 100%, but it was basically a reaction on data hoarding from large companies that should not be named here.
I think everyone knows them. There's no problem to name them. But,
So what happened? You got GDPR, and during the process of negotiating GDPR, the NSA scandal happened in the US. It had nothing to do with GDPR, really. Not when it comes to like substance matter, but it really influenced the negotiations in the European Parliament, and they made like a gazillion add-ons to the original proposal from the EU Commission. I think it was like 4,000 amendments or some ridiculous number like that. Yeah, all-time high, I think, in the European Parliament, at least at that time. So you got this very complex regulation on a very high level, like EU level, over the member state level. And basically it drove an extreme amount of cost for businesses. To compliance costs, and whom are the best to handling compliance cost?
Exactly. This actually goes to the point.
Small or huge corporations.
We've been arguing this point, and you as an expert, in regulation and public affairs for the tech sectors, we have been arguing that GDPR had the intention to try to prevent data hoarding, as you say it, and the way that the big tech giants are doing it, but it actually had the exact opposite effect. Saying that basically the only people or companies that do have the ability and resources to comply with the regulation is the big tech giants.
Yes.
And then it actually incurred much bigger costs and inability to use data for the rest of the companies. So would you agree with this?
Yes, I would totally agree with that. And I haven't heard anyone disagree, actually.
No, so you do something because of something coming in that we are trying to prevent with certain companies, and we have even named down the trifecta. What makes this so obvious? They was a beautiful word that I'd never heard before. The trifecta of they have the superior tech stack and data industrialized approaches, so they can more easily comply. They have all the advanced use cases. So they have internal case law inside their companies, so they know how to deal with the next case or the next case. And they have the size to have a legal department and even a lobbyist department on lawmaking. So who is basically best equipped to deal with GDPR? Tech giants.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think it's very unfortunate.
It is very unfortunate.
And I would stress that it's absolutely not these companies' fault, but it's rather the responsibility mainly falls on the legislator. And then you have to go back to, what was the reason behind this bill, this proposal that went through the European Parliament and the European Council and ended up being GDPR. And basically, what's missing here, both during this process of making law, and this goes for Sweden as well, like on the national level, legislative level in Sweden here, in the Swedish Parliament, and on the EU level, and in many other places, is that you don't evaluate the proposal and its effects, both direct and indirect effects. Well, you do, it's being done, but it's sort of shallow. And I mean, I know Swedish regulation better than European, but so if you look at Swedish regulation and how you sort of make national regulations in Sweden, like national law, you would have a governmental investigation appointed by the government, and they make their investigation, and they come up with a proposal, and the government takes it back and ponders this, and they make a proposal for the Swedish Parliament, and they perhaps amend some things, and then you have a law when it's passed in the Parliament.
And that takes some time.
That takes. Not least it takes time, but often what's missing is this analysis of the possible consequences of this piece of legislation, and especially indirect consequences or consequences that sort of emerge in other places. How it affects like the economy and stuff like that. If you took like GDPR. And made like a GDP impact assessment of that legislation.
Consequence analysis.
Yeah. That it would be horrible. Yeah. I think actually the Ministry of the Governmental Agency of Growth in Sweden, Tillväxtverket, whom are set up to like promote enterprise and stuff like that. I think anyway, they've made an estimate on the compliance cost for Swedish companies and organizations, GDPR compliance cost in 2018 only, and that amounted to, I think it was 27 billion Swedish kronor. That year in compliance cost for one piece of legislation, and it's massive.
It's
and
scary.
It is scary.
Yeah, it is scary, and that you have the alternative cost there. What could you have done with that?
Exactly.
That money instead of paying like lawyer bills.
But I mean, you as a lawyer or expert in regulation as well. I mean, there is a purpose. I mean, if you use regulation in a good way, there is a good purpose for it, right?
Yes.
Right. So. What do you? I guess the question could be: there is a chance that you over or under regulate different problems, and both has negative consequences, right?
I think what you're missing in the sort of legacy way of making law, both in Sweden and the EU and perhaps in other places as well, is you don't have the correct feedback loops when you develop your regulation or your code, so to speak, and that goes both during the process and after. I mean, let's say you make some new kind of regulation, and it's really awful and bad. It has all kinds of negative side effects, and it misses the mark. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Who pays the cost for that? Who has skin in the game? No one. And obviously that's not a good thing, because that enforces bad behavior, or at least like sloppy behavior.
Yeah.
Makes me think about building AI systems, and I recently had some presentations about this, and people that junior people that just they build a prototype and they're super happy, and they have a deep learning model that can do some kind of prediction, and awesome, I'm done. And then they want to put it in production and start using it, and suddenly it has unknown consequences that you don't know about, and they have these kind of weird feedback loops that you wouldn't foresee. And suddenly the model you trained on some training data that is a year old suddenly is not very useful, and certainly there is this kind of training and serving skew that doesn't make the model work as you thought. So trying to understand the feedback loop, I guess, would apply to regulation as well. I mean, right?
Yes, I think this is very much just a personal understanding of this situation when it comes to regulating tech, that you have a system that's not apt or suitable for regulate this kind of situation, basically. And one thing here is speed of change, like speed of take-up. It goes much faster than as I mentioned previously here, than the lawmaker can keep up with. so they're getting sort of like further and further away from catching the ball. And what do you do then? You get desperate and you hurl yourself forward and try to stop the ball from.
I guess, we have in traditional software engineering, we have DevOps, and then in AI you have MLOps. I guess we could need a RegOps.
PubOps. PolOps.
Regulation ops, I don't know.
RegOps.
Yeah.
But it's actually interesting that in order to keep up with DevOps, how will policy look like in an agile and iterative way? Is that what you're saying in some ways? We grew up software development with waterfall. Policy making is still the pre-study. It's going through the different motions. Waterfall project, if I take it, and it basically doesn't. In the software and what we are doing is completely now agile. So in this, maybe you can't. And we usually say you can't build nuclear power plants agile. Maybe okay, good. Maybe in lawmaking and policy making, the whole process needs to find another. There needs to be different routes for different types of industry. I don't know. Is that what you're saying? That we need to find other ways to deal with this?
There are other ways. I'm not too well versed in that, but you have like regulatory sandboxes and stuff like that.
Do you think that will work? I saw in the recent EU proposals they would propose regulatory sandboxes in Europe.
Yes, it's been proposed, and I mean on a concept level, I think it's great.
Yeah. What do you think that means? Like taking one country and just trying out a regulation before you roll it out, or
something like that, or some area, or some niche, or something sector, or something like that. Try, monitor, see what happens. And it could be sort of like a first step to how to make law in a more efficient way. I mean, everyone wants a sustainable piece of regulation. Yeah. No one. I mean, except perhaps if you're like selling consultancy services to lawmakers, everyone gains from sustainable regulation.
But I think the concept is quite, especially when we're in data and AI. So sometimes you need to validate the model. You need to validate what you're doing. How will it turn out? Will it work? So how can I create a safe environment with a minimized blast radius, where I can then validate what the policy making will be all about? Is that the purpose? I think that's how I interpret the purpose of a policy sandbox.
Yes, same here. I can't really elaborate on that. I think it would be a good thing to sort of
at least try.
At least try, and it's being made in various countries. I think Finland is again sort of ahead when it comes to trying new ways of making policy. I don't know if it's like regulation, perhaps, but it's at least policy making. They have had some trials there, just trying to sort of sandbox policies and let them play out, see what happens, and learn from that experience. So feedback loops there.
Well, me as a tech person, this makes me really happy, because we can learn, I think, so much from the tech industry in doing like A/B testing or
A/B
something
testing
before you actually roll it out to all the users.
Let's do policy A/B testing.
But this is really what they're suggesting, I think.
It is, and I think it's sort of influenced in a way from the software industry. Perhaps not directly, but the idea is very similar.
But it makes sense that the policy making follows the underlying things it's trying to regulate. So data and software is following some sort of pattern, how that is evolving and what the speed of change is all about. So then the policy making in that particular area kind of needs to stay relevant as well.
Yeah, I think perhaps you have to sort of address regulation of something that changes rapidly from several perspectives. For one, you have to stand on, like, I guess, more fundamental principles. Speaking of first principles,
yes. Let's go there.
So you know why you're actually regulate. So it's not only a reactive regulation. In a way, I like reactive regulation, that you don't fix what's not broken. Don't regulate if it doesn't need to be regulated, right? But then again, if you don't have like any like core principles where your regulation emanates from, you will be very much caught in the wind as a regulator or a legislator, and I feel that that's sort of what's happening. If you look at the EU right now, in the European Commission and their digital. It's not called agenda. The digital strategy for this.
AI white book or the
no, everything. It has sort of a cap on it. The EU Commission's digital strategy.
Is it digital strategy or digital agenda or something like this?
I think it's called
Digital
strategy, but
digital
the agenda was a strategy. So it's very much that they're trying to grasp. I mean, it's AI on various levels. You have data in all kinds of possible and impossible ways that the EU Commission thinks it should be regulated in some sort of specific way, right? And I'm not saying that it's bad, but when you sort of try to regulate something from multiple angles, and the thing itself, like if we call it data or like digitalization, perhaps to make it even wider. I mean, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere and nowhere. And if you regulate data usage from like an intermediate liability perspective, which you do in the Digital Services Act, you regulate it from a data protection perspective, privacy right, from copyright, IP perspective as well.
It's a hub job.
Yes, and so it's so you get like a legislative stack that starts to push down upon the industry more and more and more, and you see you see that it will become more and more difficult to be in compliance with all these pieces of legislation, and they sometimes contradict, so you don't perhaps know what foot you should stand on. I mean, if we comply with that regulation, are we complying with this one as well?
But
I mean, like freedom of speech versus privacy, right? It's a tricky situation.
But can I try to now open up a new topic? Because I think now we have sort of started talking about policy and into regulations and actually thinking about how it works. And we are now getting to the end of that topic, saying, and we have almost said it now, but we have said it that we have so many angles of things, so maybe we need to go first principle thinking on regulation, and I think that could be...
Just before we move into that...
Do you like that topic?
Oh, yes.
Before, it would be fun to just hear your opinion about the Digital Services Act and upcoming EU regulation, and especially about...
Okay, so finish that off first, and then we can go here.
And especially about, the potential differentiation between high-risk and low-risk AI, and that potentially they should be having, different regulations or different standards when it comes to what's required to be compliant with the regulation, depending on how high risk the AI in their use case is. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure. Let's start with the DSA, the Digital Services Act, and then we'll get to AI. I'm not too very well versed in that proposal, but we'll try. Yeah. But basically, the Digital Services Act is a proposal from the EU Commission on how to regulate intermediaries' responsibility for user content in their services. So you have a service of some kind. Your users are doing something, they upload something or something like that. What's your responsibility as a service provider for that content? It might be legal, it might be harmful or something like that. How should you address perhaps a request from someone to remove that piece of data or that piece of information from your platform? What's your liability, basically? And there, in the main focus of this regulation is the big social media platforms. I think, because the terminology isn't crystal clear here, but there's something, and the EU as well as the tech industry loves abbreviations. So it's something called VLOP. VLOP. Yes, very large online platforms, and that would be your Facebooks and YouTubes and platforms like that. But it could be more. It's not clear. The boundaries here when it comes to liability. They would have a very high level of sort of compliance with all this. There are tons of rules here to comply with to get intermediary tongue twister here intermediary liability exemptions, which they have in current EU regulation. So what your users are doing on your platform, that's mainly not your responsibility, like if you're an internet service provider. I mean, that's their responsibility as users, mainly. So that will be a rather large piece of regulation covering not only these big players but also smaller market actors. You would have like cloud providers. You would have like internet service providers and other providers as well. It's not finalized this proposal, so you don't really know.
So in theory, it can go from Facebook to Amazon, Azure. Cloud providers, you mean hardcore platform cloud providers?
Yes, they would get have some sort of liability, not full liability, because it's sort of an asymmetric application of the law, which is in a way complicated. You should have the outlook is general regulation, but here you have different kinds of regulation for different kinds of stakeholders, and that in itself is, on a fast-changing market, kind of complicated, I think. But I guess it will be necessary when it comes to liability here, because you can't like put similar type of liabilities on Facebook and on like some little cloud provider or something like that.
And could we talk a little bit, like, or for me who doesn't know the details here, or the listeners, so what is the general direction of this act? Well, what is it trying to do, and what are the things we are concerned about?
So basically, it's digital service providers' responsibility for what their customer are doing in their service.
To clarify that.
Yeah, to clarify that, and it specifically concerns content on your platform. And it could be like illegal stuff of various kind, like terror content or copyright infringement and stuff like that. And that it's also been talk of adding sort of responsibility for what's called harmful content. I don't know exactly what that is and is not, but that's sort of off the table as of now. So it's focused on illegal content, which is sort of what's defined in code or in law, basically, that it. That this regulation would apply to. And depending on what type of digital service provider you are, you would have more or less responsibility to comply, or more or less...
so essentially, if there's illegal stuff on Facebook, Facebook needs to remove it?
Yes.
Is that what it means?
Yeah, that's what it means.
Just before we end this topic, and it would be fun to hear what you thought about the Australia example, if you heard about it, where they tried to forbid Facebook, for example, and all the social medias to deliver news media without paying for it.
Please just update me. I've heard about that vaguely, but I don't know the details.
So as far as I know, basically Australia passed a law saying, the big social medias are not allowed to share news articles from news providers without paying for it. So they had to pay for being able to share stuff on social media. And then Facebook basically replied saying, okay, well, then we simply ban all the news media outlets in Australia to publish anything on Facebook. And they suddenly dropped traffic like 20% or something. And it was really hurting, all the news outlets.
Yes.
And then they reverted that law and said, this is not a good idea, obviously.
Actually, that's not knowing the details in this specific case. This has happened in Europe a couple of times concerning Google News on the national level in, I think, Germany and Spain, where they imposed levies on Google News. So if there were links, I might be not totally right on the details here because it was some years ago, but if a link to a newspaper publisher comes up in Google News when you do like a Google News search, a levy would be paid from Google to that news vendor for that. And if my memory serves me right, both in Germany and in Spain, Google just said, oh, well, then we don't link that content. Exactly. They just dropped it. And traffic, obviously, plummeted for those news media outlets, and they dropped that piece of national legislation in both Spain and Germany, as far as I know anyway.
It's a typical example of not considering the consequences of having regulation, right?
No, it's exactly. You one step thinking, basically.
Yes. And very far from first principle thinking.
Yes, very, very, very far away. And it's sort of, I mean, I used to work a lot with copyright infringement issues, representing not the least internet service providers, and a lot of arguments coming from rights holders, and I do understand and respect rights holders very much. So it's not about them versus us or something like that, but often the argument were. I can understand the annoyance and perhaps furor of someone taking what you perceive as your stuff. I have a lot of respect for that. But the solutions that was proposed from like that special interest in general, when it comes to a liability of internet service providers for letting this traffic flow in their networks, were they didn't think too far ahead. They were more just make it stop was their argument. It should stop. Like put up a stop sign or some wall or something like that. So basically censor, and then you're into like internet regulation and e-commerce regulation. Okay, so you want like internet service providers to monitor all traffic,
yes.
Just to help you,
so
not being infringed.
So you be disinfringements in order to not have disinfringement.
And that turkey basically didn't fly.
Yeah.
Which was a very, very good thing. But it's very easy for like a special interest to see it from their own perspective, obviously. And I mean, this is my property. Someone is using it, and
doesn't that really demonstrate the need for companies like IT and Telecom to really push the voice from the tech industry forward to?
Yes, we try to. We actually try in a way to sort of emulate this first principle perspective or outlook in how we build policy, because at least when it comes to data policy, we have like basic principles that we are sort of build everything else upon. So we have like a principle for lawmaking. Actually, we have a principle for
in IT and Telecom.
In IT and Telecom, in our data council, actually, we've sort of started like 3 years ago, or something like that. 4 years ago, we're starting to try to address these very complex regulatory matters and issues that all kept popping up all the more from a principle-based perspective. That I think it was rather novel, because we have like principles on IT security, we have principles on responsibility for data, access to data, and intermediate liability. Speaking of that,
it sounds like it's something we're trying to build up in AI Sweden as well right now, which is a set of like best practices. I think set of best practices do exist for software engineering, for example. It's rather well known how you should do version control or handling dependencies and package management and whatnot. But in AI, not so much. And I think in legal aspects and regulation, perhaps a set of more well-defined best practices could be beneficial.
But let's unpack what we mean with first principles and what we mean with first principles in relation to governance or policy making. Yeah, sure. So what was what was the problem you were trying to solve, and what is it that is novel, you think, and what are you actually doing? I think this sounds really interesting and good, but let's unpack what we mean here with first principle.
Yeah, well basically, if you look at how the ICT sector or the tech sector, how it sort of handles new regulation.
Yes.
Demands from either from the lawmaker or from regulatory bodies like governmental agencies supervising the market or something like that. It's very reactive. Yeah. Because I mean, the tech sector, to the best of my knowledge anyway, it's all about pushing boundaries beyond what's regulated into something new. So a frontier perspective on things. You build something that's not existed before. Basically. I mean, like you're driving disruption through tech, and by driving disruption, you will test the boundaries of the old market. And by testing the boundaries of the old market, you will test the regulation of the old market. Or you create a new market.
You create a new market. So basically, sort of the regulation is per default, disruptive innovation will try the boundaries.
Yes, or go off the chart or into some other dimension or something like that. That the regulator isn't.
There wasn't intended for that, because it was intended for another frame.
Exactly, and so. When the lawmaker tried to regulate this, that they sort of put the old jacket on the new situation, so to speak, and it doesn't really fit that well. But sorry, what was the question?
No, so first principle. So what so you realize this. This is what is going too fast, and I don't want to put words, but isn't it like reactively, based on what we had, am I in a good mood or bad mood, what's on the agenda right now, we go left or right on how we deal with each topic. And then you said maybe something like, do we need to go deeper on how we start thinking, or what is first principle?
Yes, now back on track.
Yes.
Well, basically, since we got so much input, new pieces of law proposals, actions from governmental agencies and so forth, we simply felt within the Data Council that we don't have the resources to react on everything and sort of build a new case every time, build new arguments to advocate what's good for the industry. So we simply arrived at the conclusion that we need to sort of find principles that we can stand on. So
to reason then from.
Yes, to reason from, or to build like arguments upon. And that took quite a lot of time actually, and it's sort of very general principles. But when it comes to say intermediate liability, we sort of acknowledge that's a principle that needs to be protected in able to foster a free and open internet. When did you heard someone talk about the free and open internet lately? It was some time ago, right?
Yeah, we forgot about what the whole purpose was.
Yeah, we forgot about it. We took it for granted, basically. But so that's a very important principle for us, to try to keep things open so you can innovate, so you can try new things, so you can fail, get up again, and perhaps learn something, rather than having the market being sort of closed off, or that you have to ask for permission too much in too many details before you do things.
So sometimes you get lost and don't see the wood for all the trees, and your regulations start. Wait. The core idea was a free and open internet. What happened to that?
Yes,
this is what you're trying to now distill down the core.
Exactly. So we're sort of distilling, still distilling, and try to find basic principles to argue from, and that makes, not the least, my job very much more easy, because I don't have to talk to 1,000 people every time there's something happening. I can just look at our principles. Okay, this is what we've agreed to agree on, and then we can move from there.
And how does that work out so far? I mean, like, basically, you can much quicker reason your way on pragmatically to what should be our standpoint.
It's shortened reaction time, basically, because when you have a member-driven organization, as we have, like with thousands of members, it takes time to act, especially to react, because if you don't react in time, things will be over before you react, and that's a challenge for us, because we're very wide when it comes to focus as an industry organization. We have a lot of various topics that we cover and need to cover. So how to shorten our reaction time, how to be more competitive, basically, how to argue better, how to make things happen in a way that's beneficial for the industry to a higher degree. Well, we have to find what's basically the core of the industry, what's really, really important to us, and what's worth fighting for, and what can we let go or trade off or something like that.
I personally really like this, and we can go down rabbit holes on data governance, how we can work with this, but let's not do that. What I was wanting to ask you is basically this principle-based approach, or basically thinking about the core first principles. What is your perception on the lawmakers' view approach to this, or is it principle-less? I mean, like, it's because sometimes it's like, I sometimes see this seems like we're all doing it project-based, and each project gets its own life, and then what you are doing in one project doesn't add up with the other project. I mean, like, are we having a principle? Can we find the principles in lawmakers in Sweden? I mean, like, if that's where you know most, or is that missing?
No, I think they're there, absolutely, but they're not always present. If you in the day-by-day business, so to speak. Lawmaking is by the book and so forth, but when it comes to more general principles to uphold, perhaps not always. And there are, coming back to like a consequence analysis, when you like regulate, I don't know, data protection, like privacy, how much do you ponder its implication, or the proposal's implication on freedom of speech, for instance? It's being done, of course, but it's sort of skewed and tilted, which is a challenge. And I mean, I shouldn't criticize like the lawmaker too much. They have their hands full, and it's not too easy to balance various kinds of interests. So I wouldn't say that they lack principles. The contrary, probably. But what's lacking is basically feedback loops and sort of consequence analysis, as we mentioned before.
Well, speaking about first principles and another favorite topic of all of ours, which is Elon Musk, and also speaking a bit about some of the quotes he has made, and I think it's connected to regulation as well. But it would be fun to hear your thoughts about this. So a question I often get is, Elon Musk, he's one of the biggest or the biggest innovator that we have today, and a legend, living legend of some kind. But he also made some interesting quotes, like AI is the biggest threat to mankind that we have today. Still, he's using AI more than perhaps anyone in Tesla and SolarCity and SpaceX and so much more. Why do you think that Elon Musk says a thing like AI is the biggest threat to mankind when he's using it the most himself?
Good question. I can only speculate, obviously, but I mean, if you look at AI as a very broad concept, it has inherent existential risk, and that's the outcome is not good. And you should address such a topic or thing or concept, obviously, very carefully. I think he's very much aware about that, or obviously he is very much aware about that. But then again, things are sort of put in motion. I mean, it's sort of like gene editing or like nuclear technology. It's out there, it's being used, and it's going to be used. Whether or not you think it's the worst idea in history or not, it's going to be tried. So I think I'm no expert in him, but as far as I understand, I think that he tries to sort of address this risk in a way by sort of diving into the topic and sort of try to steer it rather than refrain from it. And that's perhaps if you want to like minimize risk, that would perhaps be the best way to approach risk with AI.
I agree with that.
I mean, I can quote some of his, or paraphrase probably is proper term to say, some of the thinking he has said, and it's about regulation. So I think you can speak well about this. But he compared AI to automotive, which is of course another expert field of his, given Tesla. And he said, back in the 1950s, and speaking about regulation for seatbelts in cars, that was something that was being fought by the special interest groups of automotive industry a lot, saying, automotive, if you really enforce having seatbelts, that will kill the sale of cars, that will kill the industry, horrible, and they will did everything they can to fight off having a regulation about seatbelts. And it took like 10 years before they actually changed that, even though they had the statistics knowing that if you had a seatbelt, the chance that you will be killed in an accident is like significantly less. Yeah. So probably hundreds of thousands of people were killed because of the slow pace of regulation in that case. And today we all have in use and are happy that we do have seatbelt, I guess. Yeah. And then he said, okay, that's okay for seatbelts. It just killed 100,000 people, but not existential threat, at least to mankind. And then he said, let's see if we do the same procedure for AI. And then think, we are at a certain stage today. AI is very far from human type of intelligence, of course, but it's expanding like exponentially right now. And if we are going to have the oversight committees before we do the regulation, and we actually do have that in place, it will probably take 10 years before we do have that. And in 10 years, AI could be extremely much further ahead And if we don't have regulation in place before that happen, it could be potentially a bad thing. So I think he also said something that AI could be the best thing that ever happened to mankind, and it could also be the worst thing that ever happened to mankind. What do you think about this thinking? Do you think is that a good analogy to make with seatbelts and AI, or what's your thinking there?
Yes, it is, as much as it illustrates the problem, the inherent problem of this technology. But I think coming back to what we talked about earlier concerning regulation and policy making, that stuff. Regulation, that's great, but how to do it? To make it efficient, to make it work? How not to fall in the GDPR trap?
Exactly.
Because that could increase the risks. Because we
it
tried
worse.
regulation, it didn't work. So you have to regulate in the right way. I have no idea how you would do that with AI, and I haven't heard him. I've heard him, Elon Musk, speak on regulation, but on a much more general level. And also I heard him, and I really I got so happy hearing this coming from him. He talks about regulatory capture. If you know that concept.
No, please explain.
It's from the Chicago School of Economics, a guy called George Stigler, I think he won the Nobel Prize in the 50s, 60s, somewhere around that time. And it basically states that regulatory bodies, whether it be the lawmaker or the supervising agency and so forth, they can be owned by special interest groups. If they get too close, get too comfort, they only listen to perhaps the automotive industry's seatbelt lobbyist or something like that.
The lobbyist gets too strong.
He gets too strong, or in relation to public officials in various capacities, and then you get preferential treatment for that specific special interest. Basically favoring that special interest while everyone else bears the cost, basically. And that's sort of like rent seeking or something like that. That you don't provide. Basically, you just steer the conditions of the market, say, in a favorable condition as a special interest, and that's an inherent risk when it comes to regulation in general. And the regulator and the governmental bodies should always be on the outlook for that problem. And I think he's right to point that out. And I think it's also. And not to bash on big companies, but big companies have the resources to influence. Small companies does not have that. They perhaps have the resources to pay the membership fee in a small industry organization such as mine. But it's very difficult to get small companies sort of time and effort because they are so much more occupied with their daily operations, and they need to be to survive.
Well said, I think. It really speaks to the need for having this type of industry organizations as IT and Telecom. Who can, unless you are like a tech giant, do provide a proper type of influence or information, if you call it that, to policymakers. If you're a small company.
I would come back to responsibility. And owning your own actions. You know the concept skin in the game.
Yeah.
Nicholas Nassim Taleb, the writer and former speculator on Wall Street, I think it was.
Okay. I don't know him, but
So do you have a specific definition of skin in the game?
Yeah, rather he has, which is that you can't, to make it very simple, you can't trust someone that doesn't have some stake in the game.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So you need to have stake in the game, because otherwise, why should you care what happens?
Professional opinion makers with no skin in the game is tricky, dangerous.
It's very dangerously, and especially if you look at it over time, and if you look at, as I mentioned earlier, regulation. If there's no penalty for bad regulation, how will you ever get good regulation?
Right.
Yeah.
and that goes for like stakeholders. And I think one thing when we talk about regulation of like markets and industries, total freedom will give you a lot of innovation, a lot of trial and error, and that's generally a good thing to like get ideas to the market, and from the market to like society, and to create benefits of various kinds. That's a good thing. But when you make a mistake on the market, who pays for that mistake? So hence you need some kind of a regulation, but how to regulate without regulate in a way that curbs innovation, I think it's very, very tricky.
You know, if I were to quote Evelina from Peltarion, she is a lawyer as well, and she said, I think, something rather profound, which is, if you are going to do regulation, be careful about regulating technology by itself. You should rather regulate the effects of using a technology. Would you agree with that? I mean, it's just to take an example. Let's take a controversial example, like facial recognition, for example. A lot of people are very much against it, and of course we can easily imagine a lot of bad use of that. But still, to regulate completely against facial recognition instead of the poor applications of
the purpose,
facial
when to use it and not use it,
is dangerous as well. Just as you could say that if you regulate, what should we take, data augmentation, or something more fun, using convolutional neural networks is dangerous because it can be used for facial recognition. So let's regulate convolutional neural networks. I mean, that would be a very dangerous thing to do, right? So you should regulate instead of the effects. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, very much so. I think that's a very good line of reasoning.
Yeah.
And I think here we do mistakes, right? So here sometimes, maybe it has to do with knowledge and understanding, that we jump the gun and we regulate the technology or the technique rather than the effect. I think we have seen almost examples of that. I don't know, but that's the feeling I get. That we are not really understanding the topics. We're regulating the wrong thing. Yeah,
I think you do. I'll try a reason around this question a bit here. Yes, you should regulate the effects. We don't want bad things, so let's regulate bad things. But then again, coming back to like copyright infringement, is it the symptom you should regulate, or is it the cause?
Nice. Even next level on this topic.
Yeah.
So what's the So
still confused? But
so how do you,
symptoms?
Now we're confused on a high level at least. So how do you find the root cause? I mean, because then someone could argue the tech is the root cause. Well, it's not really the root cause. It's like the purpose, of course.
Yeah, I guess that's where you venture into politics, and like. I don't know if you should talk about COVID and
of course.
Let's go here. Let's go here. It's a good example.
Oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah, please. I love it.
No, but how various political representatives have been sort of handling the situation. I mean, and I talk generally about political parties that are in charge, that have a responsibility towards society. They are elected public officials
Member
that are
of
here.
The parliament or something.
Something like that, or the government or something like that. Not need to point to anyone in particular, but take COVID. How has many like governments reacted? They pointed to the experts on what. Okay. What is this going to? This is all interesting.
Yeah, this is very good. Continue. Follow.
Like in Sweden, you have Folkhälsomyndigheten, and they are experts within their field. Yeah. But I mean, if you are to sort of make an informed decision on where to go, which is if you are an elected public official, to me that is your responsibility. That is not your expert's responsibility. You can listen to your expert. Or rather you should, very carefully. But you have to be the one who balances things, who makes the trade-offs and stand for that and own that decision. I've listened to them, and I've made, or rather we have made this decision to walk in this direction because of that. That would be some good things coming out of that, perhaps some bad things, but that's our decision, and you can judge us by that.
And this is, of course, very interesting if you've been following the different governments and or how policy making or decision making has been done in different countries. I lived many years in Australia, so I've been following that very closely, and it's night and day how the tone of argument has been in Australian public television, and then we all have seen America, and almost like don't even listen at all to the experts. And then Sweden has one model, and in a way more balanced, I think, than in other countries. A more balanced decision on how to let the whole society run,
keep running.
So for me, someone has made a conscious, balanced choice, right or wrong. That's not the point, but it's clearly that we have gone slightly different ways here.
Yeah, or you're looking at a much broader picture of this than I'm doing. I was merely referring to that politicians, when put in front of a difficult situation, have a tendency to pointing to experts
instead of sort of
standing up. The bridge, ABC bridge. We talked about that before we went live here, I think. So they bridge it to someone else. Talk to him.
And that's the easy way out.
Yes, that's the easy way. That's not the right way out, and I think you should think about that. Speaking of skin in the game.
Yeah, skin in the game.
But there are pros and cons, so let me be a bit of a devil's advocate here and think about pros and cons. And I think Sweden has, there is a law in Sweden. It's called something like ministerstyre or ministerial governance or something.
Ministerstyre heter det på svenska.
Yeah, exactly. And it basically says that ministers are not allowed to make decisions that
interfere.
Other agencies are in charge of. Whereas that's not the case in most other countries. Yeah. I think Finland has the same as Sweden in some way, but most other countries do not. And I can see there are pros and cons with that. What's your thinking about that? Do you think the ministers should take a stronger responsibility for when to have a lockdown or not? Or
I guess on a very general level, and I should stress that I'm not pointing any finger at the Swedish government in particular regarding the COVID thing, but rather on more general level, it's sometimes too easy to point to someone else than to own the situation.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I think I don't know if it's called ministerial rule or something like that, the ministerstyre thing. Yeah. But it's good. It's a good thing to let governmental agencies do their thing because they're experts, and I mean they are regulated by the government. They get the directions from the government within this field. You should do what we say that you should do. And we won't interfere in the individual case, so to speak. But then again, if you have a very complex situation with lots of policy areas to consider before making an informed decision, then you must own that decision as a politician. Yeah. And politicians have a general tendency, and I think this is for their sort of respect and for rather the general public's respect of the politicians and political offices, and it's very important that you have a high trust in government, high trust in politicians. I think it's a bad thing that many of them tend to refrain from owning their mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly buy that, and they have to have responsibility for their actions that they do take, even if they rely on experts. They still have responsibility for what the decision they do take, because it is them taking the decision.
And I don't know. It's perhaps even a more general trend or situation or problem or challenge, however you want to put it, in owning your own mistakes.
I think one positive side effect of Corona is that we do have a lot more. If you look at the morning news shows or whatever in every TV channel we have, it's a lot more scientists appearing now in morning news shows talking about what recently happened. In some way, at least, at least me speaking as a scientist, I think that's a good thing, because it has been more respect has been given to experts in some field. Right?
But I think that to some degree, maybe that's all over the world, I don't know. But I think in Sweden that has sort of come out. But I'm not sure it's been like the scientist has got the limelight. I mean, like in Sweden, the scientists got some sort of limelight here in relation to this. But I know for a fact that they didn't in other, Western world countries. I mean, like even Australia, not so much. Not so much. So it's interesting. It's also interesting, like how this has played out. But maybe we'll leave it with that.
Yeah, I'm eager to throw out the Trump quote here, but I shouldn't.
I think I think we should, new topic, I think.
Yeah. Cool. We've spoken a lot about regulation and Elon Musk and other things, and we'll probably come back to Elon Musk a number of times more, but let's take another topic. And we spoke a bit about the media when we started, and we spoke a bit about, the news, the traditional kind of news media that we had, and the challenge that we're seeing now with all the tech companies coming up that are sharing news and then users are consuming news in a completely different way. And you had some thoughts about this. Can you just start to elaborate a bit what your thinking is about news media, so to speak, and what's happening in recent years?
Yeah, well, basically, because you asked me to perhaps ponder on something current and interesting from my personal life, and we had this media training session some time ago at my job when we had an expert. It's very theoretical. He just went through how media works, its ins and outs, and the logics of journalism, what they're after, how should you handle a situation in various ways depending on if it's live or not, and so forth. A lot about that, and it just made me think about my own media consumption in relation to media, news media, not least, and how it's changed in the last, say, 10 years. Because I've sort of migrated from having a very high consumption, direct consumption of news media and broadcasting and stuff like that. Not 24/7, but almost, I guess. Always checking my phone, always venture into the news media outlets, websites.
So what's your talk about news media source these days?
I'd guess Twitter, actually, because it's sort of curated by myself, and it's very slim. And then, various kinds of newsletters and stuff like that as well, and I should say podcasts. But that's not perhaps for news as much as perhaps like current events or deeper.
And who's we already picked up that Joe Rogan is one of your podcasts fan. Your fanboy here. What's your favorite podcasts that you sort of try to regularly follow?
I guess it varies over time. Rogan would be a staple, and through him actually Lex Friedman, which I guess you obviously know. I think I actually discovered him rather recently. I guess about half a year ago, something like that. And
through Rogan, with their collaborations.
And it's so high level, high quality. The contents, the discussions, the
guests.
topics, the guests. What else do you need, basically?
But speaking about the news, I know a lot of people in the news business as well, and it is tough times for these.
Yes,
for these
it's been for a long time.
Yeah. So, can you see a way forward for them if you take traditional media's papers that are we have in Sweden or other countries? What do you think the future will be?
I guess the role would change in a way because now you have much more competition. What do you call it? Utbud.
The supply. Or
the supply, the noise. If you want to be in that going that way.
No, but what's available to a media consumer? It's endless today. It's endless. You can get exactly what you want, and that if you're one who caters to everyone, that will be a challenge for you, and especially if you have a lot of costs relating to infrastructure and distribution and production and so forth. That will obviously bear on you. And that does bear on the media and the news industry. And I mean, look at ad revenues. Big tech companies are getting a major part of that pie, and that obviously that's difficult for them to address. And I think that perhaps as the music industry or the record industry, I should say, they need to ponder on. Basically, what's the reason for being on the market really is? What is the value that they bring? And I don't mean to like put down on like news media or broadcasting and mainstream news, but it is a very steep competition. If you, I saw a TED talk like it must have been like 20 years ago, no, 15 perhaps, with Malcolm Gladwell. If you know that guy, he writes books on developments of trends and stuff like that. And The Outlier was one book he wrote. The Tipping Point was another. The
Tipping Point, yeah. The
this
book
is like late 90s, something like that. But anyway, he had this TED talk where he talked about the spaghetti sauce guy, because it was like if you look at the food market in the US and in the world, I guess it was based on like develop the best product within a specific segments, like the best mustard, the best pasta sauce, the best whatever, and then you competed on being the best. But he discovered diversity, this guy. He basically was, I think it was hired by like the number 2 pasta sauce company in the US. They couldn't compete with number 1. How to break them? It seemed impossible.
One sauce for all.
Yeah. and what he basically came up with through focus group testing was that, and it was, I guess it was some sort of eureka moment for him. There is not one best sauce. It depends.
That's a very
on the consumer, right?
Same with news, right?
Yeah, exactly the same with news, I think.
Yeah. That's a good insight, I think. So you need personalization in some way.
Yeah, you went there.
Yeah.
Boom. Sorry. Stole my thunder.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. But so that is the core topic now, is news and how to be relevant is something about personalization.
Yeah, I think so. Speaking from personal experience anyway, I've sort of put myself in more narrow circles in a way, and it's sort of a negative side to that as well, because you get sort of cut off from mainstream if you don't. I mean, I rarely follow mainstream news, not directly.
And it's because you want the depth in the areas you like.
Yes, and I have a restriction of time. I have 3 kids and other stuff going on in my life, so I don't have too much time. And I personally, I favor my books, I favor my podcast, I favor deep conversations, and that leaves no time.
But okay, let's do an analogy here, and if we do the analogy between news and music, and we can easily see that the tech has really moved into music, and these days it's like common that you do have a personalized recommender system.
Let's go here.
That you get music from that you really like.
Yes.
And then that means that you get music that you do like, and you continue liking it and listen more to that type of music. And potentially I would argue that the long tail kind of music artists get more exposure than they otherwise would, because otherwise it would just be the mainstream kind of artists that came through.
The long tail, that was some time ago I heard that expression.
I've been a spoiler, so yeah. We spoke a lot about the long tail. But then...
but it's true.
Yeah, moving to news...
why can't we do the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, what happens if you do the same in news? Then, okay, personalization sounds good. I mean, who wouldn't like to have news that you are interested in and avoid news that you're not interested in? Yeah. It sounds like a really good. It's perfect.
But aren't we there already? Like Substack and podcasts and
maybe
it could be. But then let me flip the switch, so to speak, and speak about the negative side potentially. So it could mean that we also move more closely into the filter bubble, so to speak, right? So that means that you only get news that you like potentially. perhaps it's not in topics, it's really that the sentiment of the news that is being recommended to you. So I think in that sense it's different from music, and it would be fun to hear what you think. So if you do like a certain type of politics, for example, you get only the positive side of that type of politics instead of tasty music. Or do you see a problem with that?
Yeah, I see a problem, but I don't see the difference between music and news there. I mean, perhaps I would develop some type of music taste that I would not have otherwise due to some algorithm sort of nudging me some direction. That was not of my choosing, but rather
so you can discover new type of music in that way that you wouldn't otherwise know about, so to speak.
No, but I think,
or rather you get closed off from other types of musics as well. You don't get exposed to wide variety music, or perhaps because of this algorithm you only got to consume one type or a few types of music.
But in music we've had the filter bubble forever. Är du syntare eller hårdrockare? You know, what type of music do you like? And you have a filter bubble. What is more, concerning when it comes to news is the filter bubble that there is. We cannot agree anymore because we all have a different skewed understanding of the world's truth. The truth is not one truth anymore. Or you get an understanding for everybody is on the blue side or the red side, and everything is filtered on this now. So I think the filter bubble, of course, well, it's the impact that I'm more concerned with when it comes to news than music, I guess.
Yes,
continue, please.
No, I must really agree with you there. It's actually in my notes.
Let's go there.
Yeah, the flip side, as I was going to say, is that you put yourself in a narrower box, so to speak, or bubble, and what happens to the common societal narrative, or whatever you want to call it, the glue of society. Where does that lead? Does this situation actually lead us in the long run? And I think you should be not perhaps overly worried, but you should be concerned. And I see a risk that you will have a division in, or rather perhaps a segmentation in society where individuals don't meet or rather recognize each other. But it's like ships in the night or something like that. You don't relate to each other in the same way anymore. I think that would be a bad development.
But I would say in Sweden we have it a little bit, but in the United States now, if you're following the politics and all the different movements and everything that is happening, it's almost like a country tearing itself apart right now.
Yes.
It's really concerning, with the election and everything that happened. And
but
I don't know.
Yeah, but speaking, I know some people in social media as well, and they say one thing that people often misunderstand is that they think that you just publish things that people like and therefore they will read. But in reality what happens, at least to some people, not sure if this is true, is that if you show something in their feed, in the social media, that they disagree with, that has much higher engagement than actually things that they already like. So in some sense, if you just do the algorithmic kind of approach to what you should recommend to people, you actually do recommend things that potentially is disagreeing with your thoughts. But that could lead to the whole trolling industry that we are seeing, and I think that's a big reason for us seeing that. So in short, what I'm trying to say is things are not as easy as people think. No. I think also it's really wrong to say, let's regulate against social media news sources as a tech. We should regulate against the effects, I think, again, right? And then it should be that I think you can use tech. I know YouTube, for example, is doing something like this, saying we want to have the top things you like, but we also want to have the top thing you do not like. If you recommend those things in a balanced way, it actually is much more informative than perhaps other traditional medias could do.
I think a challenge here is that if you compare like old school times, like the 20th century media consumption, where you have very few channels, broadcasting one to many, you have a common narrative, a common understanding of things, everyone is updated on the same things and sort of fed or presented with narratives and perspectives that everyone can relate to and agree upon, basically. That is off the table today. You have endless variety, and that obviously will put much more sort of not least cognitive load on you. You have to sort of relate to all these new things coming at you, different perspective and so forth, and that I think could be a challenge that I don't know if we are really equipped actually to handle this load. And I know from my studies actually ages ago, studying computer science, that cognitive load, it's how you handle that varies a lot depending on the individual.
Cool. I think we just have 20 minutes left. So let's try to move to another topic as well, if we have time.
Can we do it like this? You had prepared a couple of topics that you thought was maybe interesting to talk about. Do you have a topic that you would sort of bring to the table that we can talk about? So if you have a topic of choice.
I think I brought them all actually to the table already.
Yeah, so we got there. I like that.
Let's talk about one of the, I think, awesome thing that IT and Telecom has done recently, which is the AI Swede of the Year award. Right?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that, or have you been involved in some way? Or
not directly. It's my esteemed colleague Lars Lundberg, whom I know you know, Anders.
Yes.
He's like the grey eminence of the industry.
Grey and
why he has silver hair actually.
Silver is better.
Silver
is better.
Yes, I have silver as well in my beard at least. So yeah.
No, but it's basically his, to the best of my understanding, his idea. And it was something that we picked up upon basically because we saw, and I think you do as well, the need to sort of championing AI in Sweden and advancements that are being made, individuals that make valid contributions, that they need to be celebrated and seen by many as leading examples of how to expand the use and development of AI in Sweden. So that's basically the main idea of it.
I mean, it really, I think, turned out really well. I mean, it got a lot of press, and I think I also think the person that you selected is someone I know and I know has contributed a lot, which is good. And I also like actually it's not an AI tech person; it's someone that use AI as a tool from a medical field, which I really enjoy. And I think that's when you really start making true value in some sense for using AI, that's really what the main positive effects are, right? Or can you just speak about in general, how did that happen? What was the starting process? How did you do the selection? Can you just, if you know any details about this, how did that process work?
I should really refer you to Lars because he's the main guy there. I shouldn't steal his limelight, really. And I'm not too read up on the details, actually, to be honest.
But we can say it was Marcus Lingman. He's
yes, in the region of Holland.
Yes.
He's like a chief medical officer there, and I think he's a strategist within the region as well. So it was for his endeavors and being a championing of AI within the region that he got the reward. But you know him, and you know more about his...
no, but we have some collaboration with him from Peltorn as well, and he's part of this MedBert project, as we call it, to use AI in trying to understand Swedish text and Swedish patient journal text to do things like, in his case, it was about trying to understand vårdskador or treatment injuries, I think the proper translation is. And obviously you want to minimize that, and if you can understand why it's happening and when it's happening, that is a way to use AI to simply minimize these kind of bad side effects that happen during the treatment of various diseases. So obviously it's super important, especially in these days with Corona. So very well deserved, I think, and really cool. But I like it. I like, how an industry like yours could do that kind of, I don't want to call it gamification, but just highlight, people that do in some way do good deeds in some way. for society?
Yeah, I think it's needed, and not only concerning AI, but and if you, in a way, and this is perhaps not always the case, but I know when sustainability issues, not least concerning the environment, when that was becoming sort of a hot topic and something that a lot of people was talking about, the tech industry was very late in promoting itself. And the benefits of using digital technology in various ways to curb like emissions and create a more sustainable society. So I have sort of a feeling that the industry tends to be sort of inward looking sometime, and it's highly competitive, so it's understandable. But I think it could be even more pride of what it sort of adds to society than what it does. And I guess this reward is a way of sort of to championing individuals that make a change. And that also goes to back to regulation and policy. Often when we talk about regulating like the internet or digital services or data usage or something, for the lawmaker it gets very abstract. It's sort of a magic box of tricks. You don't really know what it is. So they get kind of scared sometimes, I can feel in a way that, this seems very complicated and difficult, and we don't really want to touch it, or we don't know how to handle it, but we'll handle it anyway. And that really puts a lot of responsibility upon us as an industry association, a representative of the tech sector in Sweden, and upon individual companies themselves to actually explain what they're doing and why it's so great and what they need. And there is a positive trend here, I should say, that for like about 10 years ago, you didn't nearly see as much involvement and engagement from Swedish companies, Swedish tech companies, when it comes to promoting themselves, promoting the industry, promoting the positive things that the industry brings to society, as you see today. I see actually a large shift there, which is very positive, I think.
But now you're really firing me up on a new topic. Can I take this topic now? Go. So we are now starting on the industry and how we understand how important it is, if I understand you right, to for the lawmakers and for the progression of innovation, demystify.
Yes.
Yeah, we really need to demystify what this black box is all about in order to, help the lawmakers better understand, and ultimately to make understanding that tech might be the solution to the bigger problems, like pandemic, like global warming and stuff like that. So let me now flip it, because I think you are now working with an industry who are one of the worst hype monglers of all industries.
Yes.
So what do you think about your own industry and your ability to represent them when they are the marketing spinners from hell?
Yeah, fair question, I guess.
Jesus. Okay.
Let's go here.
No, but I sort of agree. I started off my professional life as a web manager. So I procured like CMS systems and stuff like that. And I know that what's being marketed is not always exactly what you get.
No shit.
And that might be all and well, or it might be perhaps vaguely okay anyway, when it's sort of not non-essential services for society, if we put it like that. But when you look at the digital component in society today, it's crucial for its function, right?
Yes.
And then you have to be more responsible. If you're like a sort of a backbone of society, or one of the backbones of society, you should act like that as well.
Yeah.
And it's obviously the individual company's responsibility to actually market what they're selling. So the onus is sort of up on them, and it's up on us as an industry representative to sort of paint perhaps the more broader perspective on what's the ups and downs and pros and cons of the industry and its services and products. But I must agree with what you're saying, that it's a lot of hype, it's a lot of spin, and that's short term, and it sells. unfortunately, I should say, it sells.
I think it, and maybe that's not even also so much a representation of the business or the industry, but actually of the customers that actually buys into this, that it works.
It's a shared responsibility.
It's a shared responsibility.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's not. There is no easy answer here, but perhaps accountability. We talked about that earlier. But you have to own your actions.
But I think this is one part of it. But actually, I think there's another flip to this, and so I did on purpose a very provocative statement, because what I'm sensing, having been in the industry, having been buying from the industry, is I think it's hurting them both midterm and long term. So I don't think necessarily it's a winning game. So I think this industry will come to a way where it will implode if it continues like that. I mean, like somewhere enough is enough.
You could look at current EU regulation proposals, of which there are many. Many of them are sort of reactions to symptoms on the market that has not been addressed, for right or wrong. And now so the legislator is sort of like back with a vengeance here.
Yes.
Now we will regulate.
And
we will do it properly, and we will do it extensively, and we will have sort of a very clear idea where we will go here, which is probably not the best idea in itself.
On symptoms, by the way.
Oh, yeah, exactly, reacting on symptoms. So I guess the industry, in a way, in itself, has itself to blame for being badly regulated. If the feedback into sort of the system of lawmaking is only a lot of hype and a lot of symptoms of injury or something, you will perhaps not get the most level and sustainable regulation. But something that is more focused on what's bad than keeping the market sustainable for various vendors, obviously. So yeah, a big responsibility for the industry, I guess.
But now, as trying to do the best for the industry and trying to make the industry the winners here, how do you think that the industry, what's if we've been on a hype train for more than 10, 15, 20 years now with one hype cycle after another, and one new buzzword, and we in data and AI, big data, it's almost a joke, right? How should the industry reinvent themselves to be more successful, to get more successful, to penetrate, to go to operation and to bring value, and ultimately to sell more and be more successful, but in maybe a bit, I don't know, sustainable way? What would be because I think you sit in a position where you really can maybe see, if we did it like this, we could do more good. We could have more impact.
Yeah, I guess educate the customers.
So educate the customers instead of dazzle them with marketing.
Yes, or at least, obviously everyone wants to market themselves. Yeah. So I don't think that will go away. But if you have informed customers, they will obviously put informed demands upon you as a supplier. Give me what I want, and I want something like this output. How can you deliver it to me at a good price? It's very simplified, but if you look at the public sector, for instance, and public sector procurement of IT, that's a model that you could work with, because it's not optimal today. I don't think anyone think it's optimal. So you have high gains in that market for everyone, really. Yeah. You could, if you sorted out the public sector IT market, it would be huge gain for society. You were talking about the health industry, for instance. If we fully digitalized public sector health, that sector, the gains in life quality, in lesser injuries, fewer deaths, cost savings for the taxpayers and so forth, and new better deals for suppliers. I mean, who would lose?
Yeah,
I think I'd like to phrase, or quote Kai Andersson. He said
Yes.
something I think really awesome, which is, you often speak about the ethics of AI, saying, in a negative sense that it can be abused. But you can argue, as you I think did now in health industry, that how ethical is it not to use AI when it can save so many lives?
Yes,
And I think that's a really profound kind of
very good perspective.
but I think we have an obligation to demystify as an industry. We have an obligation to basically, if we are talking about AI as the next general purpose technology, so then we need to act like that. We need to sort of demystify and take it to a place where the marketing is irrelevant. I mean, like quoting, I'm trying to paraphrase Alexander Bard. I mean, like if you now want to talk about philosophy, so he's talking about what type of marketing and what will be relevant in the next 10 years in the social media or the noise, and he, the new value is the attention value. Marketing is, and attention means that you need to be recognized. So you need to, in some way, people need to know who you are, but it's a product out of recognition times relevance or value. So if you're big, but you're doing marketing spin, it has zero value.
Yeah.
And if you have really, really good content, but you're not recognized, it also has zero value. So I'm getting to that. I think that's a good way of looking at this. To get attention and to do things good, you kind of need to be relevant. And for me, it kind of means now less marketing buzz and more concreteness and demystify relevant concreteness. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it goes for policy making as well. I mean, for the industry to be able to sort of describe itself, what it is, what it brings to the tables, what the risks are that you should care about, and the risks that you should not care about as legislator. And that is a challenge, and I think the general purposeness of digitalization as a phenomenon is an obstacle here, because it becomes very obscure. It's only in the application that you can really see what it is, and in that way it differs from a lot of other areas.
Yes.
Cool. We have like 5 minutes left, and we have a lot of topics, but I could present 3 topics to you, and you can choose one that you like to cover now in the last couple of minutes. So one of the topics could be, how do we promote more tech companies that use data and AI in Sweden and Europe? Another could be the singularity, more philosophical question, what's the pros and cons? Do you think it's dangerous? What can we do to make it as beneficial as possible? A third could be the pandemic, speaking more about the economical impact and what we can do to, I guess, reboost or recover the economy in the best way forward. Any preference that you have of these 3?
Well, I'm skewed towards the singularity, but let's talk about the pandemic.
No.
What?
No. What?
Okay. Let's talk about the singularity.
Let's talk about the singularity.
Okay. So let's start. Perhaps you have a preferred definition of what do you think of when you hear the term singularity in this case?
AI surpassing human intellect.
Cool. And do you think there is what's the pros and cons with that?
Unknown risk would be a con. What happens beyond that it's unknown, and hence you can't size the risk. And
do you think it's necessarily bad to have a singularity happening?
Not in absolute terms, no.
It's more probable that it's bad, or is it?
It's unknowable, as far as I can understand it anyway. And I guess coming back to our previous discussion when we touched upon on this topic, is that if you have an inherent existential risk, I mean, you have to tread extremely carefully. And I don't know if that's the reason behind Musk going to Mars or something like that. But you can't really move forward without acknowledging that risk, and that is a risk of extinction, basically.
What is the risk more specifically? I mean, we know that humans today are the most intelligent species that we do have, and that could change potentially with a singularity.
Yes.
Does that mean do all other species that are less intelligent than humans necessarily have a bad time because of that, if you see what I mean?
Well, it's how they spend their time is more and more up to us.
But I mean, we don't go around killing ants just for fun, so to speak. I mean, or
some do.
Okay, maybe. Okay, but what my point is, is it necessarily bad that some other species become more intelligent than humans?
No, and I think you should perhaps not, when it comes to existential matters, you should not only focus upon intelligence as a relevant factor. There are many other aspects of existence that you need to relate to, and I don't know what IQ is, some sort of number representing, I don't know really what. Some.
Have you ever pondered about when or how far away is singularity? Have you pondered about that?
Not standing on my own capability of reasoning. I've heard others reason around that when that should or rather could possibly occur. But going back to the inherent existential risk, I think that is something that shouldn't automatically refrain you from doing something within AI, or like that you should try to ban it or something like that. On the contrary, I think the Musk approach that try to steer it or sort of ride the elephant or something like that would be or tame it perhaps, guide it,
or merge it, with Neuralink and whatnot. Yeah. So merge with AI, perhaps.
That could, from a risk perspective, perhaps be the most advantageous outlook for humanity when it comes to this risk.
And we have had, I think this is a little bit your point of view. We maybe should be more afraid of narrow intelligence going rogue than artificial general intelligence. So I mean, both because one is quite real and could happen, quite around the corner today more or less. And actually, if you think about it, it's a much more real threat that can really screw it up.
I'd see it like two different types of risks.
Yes.
The one narrow AI risk with narrow AI would be to me more graspable, what it could be and lead to, and the
financial market going rogue or whatever, something like this.
The AI risk, it's. I can't size it at all.
No, that's the point.
Yeah. But if you have some faith, I mean, I think that's the only thing you can have in these kind of situations. I would argue that we can see that civilization is progressing throughout the years, since the Stone Age and forward, and we can see that we are evolving from the law of the jungle to become increasingly civil in some way.
In some ways,
but yeah.
But in general, we're moving in that direction, I would argue. So as long as we
are we doing that?
I think so.
How many minutes do we have left?
No, because I think it's interesting because we have talked about capitalism, and now we're talking about we have a capitalism that has even gone rogue the last couple of years. I mean, what's the purpose of capitalism has deteriorated the last couple of years.
Let's try to connect the development of human morality with technology.
Yeah.
And you're saying, Anders, that we are evolving to be more civilized. I mean, drone usage in war zones, for instance, how moral is that? Did that exist before?
We have to think about the time scale here. We're speaking about thousands of years versus 2-3 years or tens of years, and it's of course there are things that are happening in just recent years that are potentially bad. And that is really my point. And let me just try to finish and make my point if I can. So my point is that I'm more afraid, what you said, about the narrow intelligence, because then we don't have the moral kind of reasoning that a general AI would have. Then it's just, I don't care. My goal is now to kill as many people as I can with a autonomous drone going out killing people. They don't have a superior intelligence to us in any way. but they are super, super efficient in doing the task they are assigned to do.
Yes.
That's super
So
dangerous.
if someone is signing that with a bad intention,
Or
scary.
going on the some kind of stock market, and I just want to maximize the profit I'm making, and they could win over all others. That could be another financial crisis that we can easily have very, very soon. And these are the things that I'm much more concerned with, at least, than actually coming to the point where someone else that is smarter than us can control these kind of potential bad side effects.
So your reasoning is that someone that is smarter than us will see and balance the benefits.
Yeah, they will control the dangers that can happen in that way.
If they don't have going back to the Matrix movie,
Yes.
that they realized that had a complete. this is fiction, of course, but but it's interesting. The storyline is that they need energy, right? And they find the energy consumption in the humans. So then, of course, everything, the whole idea of what is balanced goes rogue again. So this is philosophical or completely theoretical, but it's interesting.
It's fun to ponder, I think. About
We didn't catch your. We're gonna stop. So I'm sorry, guys. This is gonna be for the after work.
Yes.
So we started with a policy nerd with a philosophical touch.
Something like that.
Yeah, and we're gonna explore the philosophical touch now off camera.
That's a good cliffhanger, and it's,
Because we love it. We all love it.
Yeah, I hear so.
Pär, it's been awesome to have you here. Can you just speak a bit about what's happening next in your life, both professionally or personally?
Shortly on personally, I'm going to try to finish some of my books on my ever longer book reading list.
You still read books, at least.
So books is good. You did something.
Oh yes,
Physical.
Both.
Both.
But physical it's a very nice format.
Yeah, and are you allowed to keep them at home, or you need to sell them?
That's a discussion, actually. So I have a couple of books that I need to finish, and I hope to do that during Easter break.
And what types? Is it fiction? Is it what type is your favorites?
It's mostly non-fiction, actually.
Non-fiction.
I try to read fiction, but I don't know. I skew towards non-fiction. So I have a new novel by, or it's not new, but it's new to me. A novel by Robert Heinlein, if you know him, sci-fi author, American, libertarian guy, which I kind of like. It's called. He's the writer of Starship Troopers. If you've seen the movie.
The movie,
of course.
Yeah. We've seen the movie, but not read his book.
Read the book. It's
way better.
It's it's better. It's I like the movie as well. But he has a book that it's called "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress." That's what I'm going to read during this Easter. And perhaps finishing off in more than one way, when it comes to my professional side, I'm actually going to change direction slightly, starting to work for an individual company here in the summer.
Oh, this is what a scoop. We got a scoop here.
Yeah, you got a scoop. It's actually it's sort of out there as of today, so I can mention it here on the podcast, and it's going to be very interesting. Working for doing public affairs for a commercial enterprise rather than an industry association. So that will be a new thing for me.
Can you mention the name of the company?
Yeah, sure. It's a Swedish online gambling company called Kindred.
Kindred, not a small company.
Not so small company.
Not so small company.
Wow! Yeah. Congratulations, Pär.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really thrilled.
And we're happy to have a scoop.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Cool, Pär. Anyone that you would recommend for us to have on this show that you would like to listen to yourself potentially?
Well, let's say the funniest guy in the business, in my line of business anyway. And I think we mentioned him already. You know him, Lars Lundberg, my esteemed colleague. Yeah. He is I don't know if he's sort of he's even more contrarian than I am, so I'm not sure you will get him down here in your dungeon. But he's the funniest guy, and he has really a unique outlook on things. I love him for that. So he's a great guy. And have you had any politicians down here?
Not yet.
What's
I
the
don't think.
closest? But who do we want? Who are you thinking about?
Anders Borg.
Anders Borg would be nice.
Yeah.
He would be a name. You also have a Swedish member of parliament in the European Parliament, Jürgen Warborn. He's on a committee on AI.
Oh.
So he's a guy that actually knows what he's talking about.
That
almost
sounds really interesting. A politician who knows AI.
And he's part of some specific party, or?
Yeah, the moderate party.
Oh, cool.
Jürgen.
Moderaterna.
Yes, sounds good.
As well, the Minister of Innovation, right?
Baylan, you mean, or no?
Yeah. And the one that was involved now in what was it, the agenda?
That was Baylan.
Baylan.
Baylan was that.
exactly.
So Baylan as well, yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be the first. The second thing I would like to see is like the economics of AI, which is a little bit more discussed now because you have the economics of cloud, economics of machine learning models, economics of AI and things like that. And we're talking about singularity, but probably we will never live through to see it because probably the economy of AI will create the AI divide that is bigger than bigger disaster than anything else that we have ever witnessed. My dystopian view of that.
Dystopian finish.
Awesome. Thank you very much,
Yes.
Pär, for coming here and speaking on our podcast. It's been a true pleasure to speak about all the things, and I'm looking forward to coming discussions now that I
Yes,
think will be even more
I
interesting.
have so many questions to where I'm going to take this now, off camera.
Thank you very much. I'm
So
delighted to be here.
super cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.